Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. I'm Suzanne Sherman. I'll be your host here on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. We'll be going live for the next hour. Today is Wednesday, July 24th, also known in Utah as Pioneer Day. I'm going to be getting a little bit into the history about that. It's pretty interesting. I want to remind you can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. CRN is our fan page group. Want to encourage you to join there. We've got some people that are taking a lot of time and sharing some posts and insights. Really appreciate your taking your time out of your day to share your information with that. And we always appreciate the participation. Also, the Wasatch Report. Suzanne Sherman's The Wasatch Report is my news page. You can follow me there. If you like the stuff we're posting on these official pages, please share it. I have a girlfriend who had a public page and she was reaching out in the tens of thousands, and Facebook pretty much has killed what she was doing. This was a gal that's very much anti-war connection, coincidence? I think not. So if you like what you're seeing, please share. We're getting a big outreach, so we want to transfer that over to greater followership and greater listening numbers. We really appreciate the growth that we are getting. Speaking of that, I want to thank our good friends in Owensville, Missouri Liberty Radio has syndicated my show. Really appreciate that. They're going to be looking into our other shows. I talked to them and they'll add that to their lineup as well. I think they'll be impressed once they hear them. You can also listen live on YouTube. If you're doing that, we have a live chat. Jeff monitors it and he will interject with your comments and questions, and we can add that into the discussion. I'll keep my Facebook page open as well. You can send me messages privately and I can add that. We have a SoundCloud page as well. If you cannot listen live, our downloads are available for free. We'd ask that you follow, share, tell your friends if you like what you're hearing. Once again, Facebook isn't going to help us. Boosting won't help us. Not that we're going to send them any of our money anyway, but it's an uphill battle against these tech giants. But it's up to you. If you want the word out, I got a great message from somebody the other day who'd never heard of me, came across me on a Facebook thread, said he duck-goed me and absolutely loved it. Said, where have you been all my life? But I've been waiting for a platform like this. This is what it takes, folks. We need people being active. He came across me happenstance. If you guys can do your part and share our message and we can get out there, a lot of people, I think we can help with the message that we have. You're not going to hear this stuff at other stations. Right now, mainstream media is covering the dog and pony show. Mueller's back in the news. They're talking about this in Washington, D.C. We're not going to do that here. You can listen to that anywhere else all day long. Try and have something for you that's kind of a break from the norm. What's this crazy girl in the mountains going to talk about next? Or what's that NSA cybersecurity guy? What's he got going on? There's always something different. We have also, Justin Spears is coming back. He's going to add a podcast focusing on education and economics. So really excited to have him. We also have a Radio Co link. You can just go to our page. It's pinned. You can listen 24/7. Jeff does an outstanding job. Jeff Johnson, producer, co-host, good friend, making sure there's always something interesting 24/7. You can just play that and hear, the Wasatch Report, Waking Up Cerberus, The Spy Who Loves Liberty, Liberty Minutes, Fundamentals of Federalism, Case in Point, soon to be added, Justin's podcast. So I think you'll be pleased. Just give us a chance, spend some time. If you want to catch up where all my articles, all of our shows, my blogs, SuzanneCSherman.com, these articles that I publish get out there and then they kind of go away in the news cycle. So if you go to Suzanne's articles, you can catch up on everything. We're going to discuss the one that I had that came out last week from the 10th Amendment Center, and that is entitled that is called, let me see, it's right here. The Supreme Court simultaneously tramples state sovereignty and the Fourth Amendment. That's a case involving warrantless blood draws for unconscious suspects of DUI. So we'll get into that in a few moments. So a couple quick announcements. Adam Kokesh, who is a presidential hopeful for the Libertarian Party, his folks have reached out to me and they want to get him on the air. So we'll be getting that as soon as we can coordinate our schedules. Some fun stuff coming out here in Utah. If you're in our neck of the woods out here. The Weber County Fair is coming up. That'll be at the Golden Spike State Park. Indian relay races. Jeff, have you ever seen those? They look amazing, and I cannot wait to go see them. That's going to be August 9th and 10th. Have you ever seen those?
Never even heard of them.
I
So
hadn't either, and a friend of mine out in the Cheyenne area said, "Hey, you got to come out and see this." And what it is, it's Indians that they hop on these horses bareback. They have to run, hop on, race them, and then jump off and hop on another one. And the photos, they're just amazing. I think I shared their website the other day, so that's going to be a lot of fun. I'll be there. We're putting a group together to get out there. So if you're in the area, you're interested, hopefully I'll see you there. How are you, Jeff? We had a show the other day and you were off for a week, so it's nice to get back into the mix with you. What's going on?
not much. Yes, was up in Maine. Did some training with some folks up there in the preparedness mindset. So I don't give away what they do up there much, but I had a great time with that. And then Jason and I rode four-wheelers around. There's thousands of miles of trails. As a matter of fact, there's a trail that goes all the way up into Canada, and it's part of the international trail system. So it's actually a lot of, you can get lost and die out in the woods, and some of these trails are so remote.
We actually did a show about an incident that happened out there. It was a man that took off with his daughter on a snowmobile, and we were just going to go to a hotel. And there was that system of trails that you discussed. And they were going to just ride to this place. And they only had the clothes they had on their back and a change of clothes, no survival stuff, even though they were going on remote trails. And he hooked a rail on a piece of metal. I think they were going over train tracks, and broke his leg, fell down in a ravine, and she had to hike for miles. They're now up there. They've got wolves, bears, all sorts of predators, and he had a severely broken leg, and they spent a couple days out there. So always be ready. I'm sure that you had some supplies on hand in case something happened.
Yes, there is I'm always prepared with something.
Let me get into a little bit of the history of Pioneer Day, because to me, I was thinking about mental preparedness, and I kind of put myself out here. There's a lot of history. I'm not far from Fort Bridger, where the Mormon Trail, the California Trail, all these trails coming out combined, Pony Express, and there's a big trading post out there. But not far from my house also is East Canyon, and that's where the Mormons came through. It's also a split off where the infamous Donner Party made their fateful decision. And you can see where they said this is the point where they decided to take a certain route. And as we know, things didn't really go very well for them. But Pioneer Day is just a day where Utah essentially shuts down. The day commemorates the entry of Brigham Young and the first group of Mormon pioneers into our Salt Lake Valley, and that took place June 24th, 1847. They viewed their arrival as the founding of the Mormon homeland, hence they call this Pioneer Day. The Mormons, as they were commonly known, left their settlement in Illinois, and they journeyed west seeking refuge from religious persecution. And this was particularly after the murder of their founder and their prophet, Joseph Smith, on June 27th, 1844. They determined to settle an isolated region. They made their way across the plains and over the Rocky Mountains to Utah. They lost many of their party to disease during the winter months. By the time they got here, the desolate valley was a welcome sight. Potatoes, turnips were soon planted, and a dam was built. They had solemn ceremonies. Settlers consecrated a 2-square-mile city and sent back word that the promised land was found. By the end of 1847, nearly 2,000 Mormons settled the Salt Lake Valley. The first Pioneer Day was celebrated in 1849 with a parade, band, music, and speeches. And today it is celebrated annually as Pioneer Day, and it's a state holiday out here in Utah. There is a lot of history out here. If you go to Temple Square, there is a museum of the LDS, the community, and how they actually made it out here. And the temple, they actually had to harvest, get these rocks out, and they put them in carts for over, I think it took a couple days, and that's how they built the temple. But it's interesting because I've been thinking about wanting to have on my show, a conversation of mental preparedness. We talk about preparedness all the time. And these people had to be pretty tough to do what they did. And you see that in the community out here. These are people that live a life of preparedness. The church says they should have a year's supply of food on hand. If you go out to the Temple Square area, you can see where Brigham Young lived. And there's also a house next to the Beehive House called Lionsgate, where his wives and children all live. Today it serves as a place where they'll feed people. You can show up and it doesn't look like a traditional charity soup kitchen. You actually sit down and have tables. Haven't been in there but I have looked in there and seen. So kind of some cool history out here. But let's turn the tables a little bit, Jeff. Go ahead.
We have a day in Pennsylvania that the schools are closed, and it's almost like a state holiday because, like I said, the schools are closed and everyone pretty much stops what they're doing. You know what that day is? Opening day of deer season.
I was thinking back in the day, a lot of schools shut down for deer season. I'm glad to see they're still doing that. Coincidentally, a lot of kids would go to school after hunting with, guess what? Their rifle on a rack in a truck, right?
Yep. But it's still interesting that it's even today, Pennsylvania shuts down pretty much, and everyone goes hunting on the opening day of buck season. So just thought that was funny.
Yeah. Well, I've been thinking a lot. We talk about preparedness in general, but we don't really get into the mindset that you have. And I try to see, I think about this. What's really holding people back once they are prepared? What's a big obstacle? And I have to think a lot of times we're stuck in our comfort zone. We just don't want to do stuff that challenges us physically or mentally. We get set in our ways. And what happens then if you really are challenged? Something comes up. Let's say you break down. This happened to me. I mean, there's a Suzanne from my 20s and then the Suzanne now. How would I have handled this differently? I was in my 20s. It was a summer day. I was out in the Delta area in Central California, and my car broke down on the highway. I absolutely panicked. I had no supplies in my vehicle, no way to protect myself, no water, no nothing. So what did I do? This was back before electricity, so I didn't have a cell phone. So I was just walking back to a phone booth to try and call for some help. There were cars there. I would have gotten some help. But the thing is, I panicked. Had that been me now, I would have realized, and forget cell phones. Let's say there's no cell service. I would have been prepared to stay there the night. I also would have told somebody, I am leaving from here. This is when you can expect me. If you don't hear from me, this is where to find me. So it might have been uncomfortable. It might have been inconvenient, but I wouldn't have panicked. So these are the things you learn. So how do you go about getting prepared mentally? How do you get yourself prepared for when a challenge comes up and you don't do what I did and just panic and freak out and cry and act like an idiot? Push yourself. If you're uncomfortable with speaking to people that you don't know, as you're going about your daily life, look them in the eye and smile. Say, hello, how are you? Start interacting with people. When I was in law school, there was actually a gal in there, and she was of a different culture where the women there just weren't as outspoken. And we all would brief cases out loud and have discussions. And part of being an attorney is to be able to communicate effectively, particularly in speaking. Even if you're not in the courtroom, you have to discuss matters with clients and adversaries. And this was a gal that had never spoken out loud before in class, and she had to stand up there and speak, and she literally broke down and started crying. So something like that. I'm not saying make yourself cry, but if there's something that makes you uncomfortable, push yourself a little bit, push the envelope, get used to it. You know, it used to terrify me, Jeff, to the point where I couldn't even focus or sleep the night before. Doing radio. I used to just absolutely be a nervous wreck. I did a podcast. We actually did live radio with two other friends, and I would come on with them once a week. And I was so nervous. I was just a disaster all day long. I got out of that. So now this is my comfort zone. Well, what's the next level? And it could also be something physical. If you're involved in a sport, take it to the next level. If you're out jogging around and there's a 5K coming up, Do that. Push yourself. Do you have any thoughts on this, Jeff?
Yeah, I just want to kind of go down a different another path on this too. As far as mental preparedness, one of the things that's helped you to get mentally prepared is actually training and becoming physically prepared for it. So, we were discussing before the show, you've been boxing lately. And
Yes.
so you've been training. So part of your mental preparedness is all that practice. And as you do it more, that your training starts to take over and your mental preparedness and makes everything just kind of flow easier. And like you said, I was up in Maine, and I'll just mention a little bit. It was tactical training. They have it's corporate security training, and until they give me leave to discuss their business on the radio, I won't mention their business. But I once I know it's okay with them, I can discuss it more. But the fact of the matter is, it's corporate security training, and it's muscle memory, doing those things in security that you need to do, so you're mentally prepared. If you're not mentally prepared because you've been practicing it, you're going to have problems implementing it later on. So that's my only point with that, is that mental preparedness is tied to actual practice and physical preparedness.
And all the gadgetry in the world, all the cool gizmos we can get online, all the prepper stuff isn't going to help you if you lose your mind at the first sign of trouble. And again, this is the stuff you want to be prepared for, so you're not figuring it out when you actually need to do it. That's why I started hunting before I had to survive and catch my own food if that ever happened. Now, if something were to happen, I don't have to learn how to skin the meat. I don't have to learn how to do all this and prepare and process. Check, mark it off the box. I'll be able to do it stress free. And yes, you did mention boxing. And this week I had a huge milestone. I only started in May, and I figured, well, there's a competitive class where they do sparring. I'm going to wait a year before I get in there. Well, then it became 6 months. And then lo and behold, I found myself going, just within a couple months in there. And I first started sparring with somebody 2 nights ago. And it's a completely different experience than being on the bag. The first couple months I've been focusing on your form, your technique, and how you defend yourself. The first time you go in the ring, and I found out from talking to the other fighters there that it all goes out the window the first time you spar. I felt horrible about myself. Oh my gosh, I hate this. I don't like it. That's the point where most people would stop. But if you want to get tough mentally, I went back in there. I went back and did a second round the first night and realized, okay, I'm changing my game. What am I going to do different? Huge difference between the first round and the second round. Last night focused a little bit more on being defensive and also offensive at the same time. And it was a fabulous learning experience. So now I went from having gone the first time, not wanting to do it again. Do I have aspirations to be a fighter? No, but this is getting out of my comfort zone. You're hitting a black bag. There's nothing coming back at you. Well, let's take it to another level. Always look for a way to push yourself. Don't give up just because you're older and you've accomplished what you want to accomplish. There's always a way you can make yourself better, physically, mentally, tougher. Always think about being mentally and physically tough. I think if that happens, you're going to avoid some bad situations. Speaking of bad situations, I'm going to change gears here. I hope you found that little bit of discussion we had interesting and informative and helpful. And if you decide to pursue that and follow up with that advice, I'd love to hear what you're doing. A few weeks back, was talking about a very unfortunate situation. In June, a young lady had a flight coming in the middle of the night. I think it landed at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning out here in Salt Lake City. And the unfortunate woman took a Lyft drive and was missing. Turned out her Lyft driver had murdered her. And I'm not going to blame the victim on here, but you have to be able to have the conversation about personal security and personal protection without blaming the victim. But what she did, again, coming in at night, and it appeared that she somehow went off with this guy. And there were some other things that I'd noticed about her too that just shows she wasn't really prepared to deal with evil people. You always have to assume that evil people were there. And to be fair, I wasn't either. In my 20s, I was every bit as naive as this poor, unfortunate woman was. But now here is how Utah is going to handle the problem. Apparently, in the park where she was last seen, they had fake cameras that were in the park, and now they decided to remove them. Well, the North Salt Lake City Council unanimously voted to remove the dummy cameras from Hatch Park. What are they going to do? Replace them with working cameras. They're going to be installed in their place and at other parks around the cities. In a Facebook post, her friend called it the first step in a positive change in the community. So, what we're going to have here now is because this woman violated every aspect of personal security, made a dumb mistake, law enforcement is going to double down on the surveillance state here in Utah. I don't think eventually there's going to be a place where we can go where we're not going to be subject to surveillance cameras and we're not going to be subject to ultimate evil, which is facial recognition software. We've been talking about that on the show. Here's the thing. These cameras aren't going to save your life if you do something stupid. They will help solve the crime after the fact, but how's that going to help your family when they've got a funeral to plan? Once again, government never passes up an opportunity to double down on invading our privacy under the auspices of greater security. It's not going to save you. It's up to you. Comments, Jeff?
No, we were discussing before the show that this whole facial recognition, this camera issue, is going to be the death knell of our liberties in this union. It's quickly going that way. We're watching it happen in other countries. China's doubling down on their social credits and using that to take away any right to worship God over there. And they're using it to arrest people in the church. It's going to be coming here. They're going to use it against us. I mean, we have the LGBT, whatever initials it is today. I don't know which ones they are using now, but they're going to use that to destroy the church, and they're going to use social credits because we're going to be chosen out as people that are bigots and racist and not tolerant of people that are doing something else, when in fact we're tolerant. It's just that we're being forced to accept it.
Yeah, and the problem is there's a mindset here that celebrates it. Here's a quote from a Facebook post from one of her friends. We want to show that we are not afraid. Yes, you are. And celebrate the small goodness that can come out of a senseless tragedy. Tonight was the first step in you inciting some incredible change in our community. We are so proud of you. What the hell is wrong with these people? Oh my goodness. So again, this is about solving crimes after the fact. This is about spying on the community. What happens? The government is opportunistic and takes these situations. And again, we have these surveillance cameras. Remember Lexington, Kentucky, we had our good friend Mike Meharry from the 10th Amendment Center. Police had set up security cameras in the city of Lexington at a skateboarding park. And he said, well, what are you doing here? And he files a Freedom of Information Act request. And once it's granted, the city had to sue him to challenge him. So what's the effect here? Well, you could go personally bankrupt if you're sued now. So fortunately, the ACLU stepped in and they're involved in this lawsuit. And one of the things I said to Mike when we were interviewing him here on another show, I'm sure you're being inundated personally with messages of gratitude from the people of Lexington, Kentucky. And we had some very uncomfortable dead air silence because that was the amount of appreciation and expressions thereof that he received from the people of Lexington. It was the same mindset. Oh, thank you. We're so much safer now. No, you're not.
If you have nothing to hide.
Right. If you have nothing to hide. And anybody that says that, I love what he says, make public your internet searches for a year. Tell people what you've done for the past year and see if you're comfortable doing that. I mean, if you have nothing to hide, what's the problem? Well, just the other day, the 10th Amendment Center published an article talking about City Hall using facial recognition to blacklist and ban residents. Jeff, you just mentioned social credits. Is this not a form of social credits? So local governments, private corporations are using facial recognition to secretly blacklist people despite having no valid reason to do so. They cite an article that was recently published in the Idaho Statesman proving that local governments are using facial recognition to ban residents, beg your pardon, from accessing city-owned buildings. The Boise City Council claimed they need facial recognition cameras to protect public employees from disgruntled workers or unwelcome residents. Unwelcome residents? What makes somebody unwelcome? I'll give you an example here. Just in the cyber community, Summit County Health Department out here was putting all these things on Facebook about, 80% of women in Summit County are getting mammograms, but with your help, it can be 100. And I just wrote on there, why is it my responsibility to pay for another woman's mammograms? Well, guess who got banned from expressing her opinion in that form? And if you want to play the incorporation doctrine game like everybody else did, isn't that a violation of my First Amendment rights? I have a right to communicate with what's going on in my local government, but no, they shut me down. Can't do it. Getting back to this article, the Boise City Council claimed they need this again to protect from unwelcome residents. Wow. The article says there must be a lot of disgruntled or unhappy residents for the city council to justify putting facial recognition cameras there, right? Well, I say, would you believe both city halls have just banned one single resident because he opposed, this is going to sound familiar, using city funds to pay for an NBA developmental league team. His ban did not last very long because Mike Jorney, the spokesman for Mayor David Beater, said no one is currently banned from City Hall. So if no one is currently banned, they say, why install facial recognition cameras? Could the government use facial recognition to quell dissent? Of course they can. We're seeing that now. How many people will refuse to complain or speak out because law enforcement could use it to identify them? Absolutely. This is going to have a chilling effect on dissent. The Statesman, the journalist, the article here, revealed that technology would be used to identify people who are banned from City Hall for any reason. Journey admitted that there is no specific instance that could justify installing the facial recognition on the property. So if there's no specific reason, why are they using it? Again, to create secret blacklists and quell dissent. Let's say, Jeff, now we've got these cameras out here in our parks. Let's say somebody has an event at a park. There was one that I went to in West Valley a couple of years ago. Bill Keebler had this with Sheriff Mack from the Constitutional Sheriff's Organization. The Daughters of Lavoy Finicum were there. I don't like this gal, but Michelle Fiore from Nevada. I thought she was kind of corrupt, but also some of the people that were at the Malheur Refuge when it was taken over temporarily. What's to say they couldn't have those cameras there and then have all of us on now a list? And I bet I'm on one for being there in the first place, because what happened to Bill Keebler after the fact, confidential informant got him nailed for supposedly attempting to set off a pipe bomb outside of a BLM building in City Hall. They eventually just gave him a deal. And if he was so dangerous where he was trying to set off a pipe bomb, why would they let him out in the first place? I'll tell you why. Because the Bundy trial that they'd had was over, and he could have testified as being in charge of security at Bundy Ranch that at no time did anybody on the Bundy Ranch property ever point a firearm at the federal agents there. So anyway, getting back to this whole thing, facial recognition software. We have cameras in parks. What's to say they're not going to have facial recognition technology in these cameras around the city? You go to an event, you want to have a protest, they know who you are. That information doesn't go away. This is scary stuff, Jeff, don't you think?
Yes, it is. And, we're talking about social credits again. Let me bring this back to the East Coast here a little bit, too. Not long ago, it was put out there by the government of New York that they wanted to pass a bill that would require those wishing to purchase a firearm to give the state their passwords or whatever for their social media so they could search the social media to decide whether they were going to allow them to purchase a firearm. So how are they going to do that? I mean, they're going to have to assign some value to each thing. If you're posting against the government, that's going to be a negative. You're your chances of buying that gun are going down every time you post something. So dissent will be outlawed one way or the other. Then they'll use facial recognition to decide, oh, this is the guy that we just banned. He can't buy a gun. So now they'll send the cops there to escort you off the property so you can't purchase the gun. This is the danger of allowing government to have all these cameras, the facial recognition, the ability to look at our social media. I know this isn't a First Amendment thing or a Fourth Amendment thing, but most states have those things in them, their constitutions. And, we're supposed to be secure in our person, property, and
Papers and effects. When you talk
right.
somebody that's going to go through your social media to determine whether or not you have the right or the privilege of owning a firearm, I think of this little social justice warrior that lived in my condo complex in Palo Alto. She was very proud of the fact that as the first hurdle in the HR department of a tech company, that if an otherwise qualified, desirable employee, the resume came across her desk, and on the resume that individual put that they were a hunter, she would deny her employer the opportunity to hire this individual because she was opposed to hunting. And she said, I would throw all of those in the trash. Well, somebody that's going to see your social media and look through there, oh, this person hunts, we're not going to allow them to have a firearm. You think that subjective kind of information and that subjective behavior is not going to get into whether or not they're going to allow you to have a firearm? Absolutely. We're giving these people positions of power. Don't think for a nanosecond that they're not going to take advantage of it. And speaking of the security and the privacy online, you mentioned that. We have another article out here that U.S. Attorney General Barr, William Barr, says, guess what? Americans should accept the security risks of encryption backdoors. This is the guy, we did a show also a while back. He had fully supported the Ruby Ridge snipers, by the way. So this article here, this is from techcrunch.com, said that consumers should accept the risks that encryption backdoors pose to their personal cybersecurity to ensure law enforcement can access encrypted communications. Why not just get a warrant? In a speech Tuesday in New York, he parroted much of the same rhetoric as his predecessors and other senior staff at the Justice Department, calling on tech companies to do more to assist federal authorities to gain access to devices with a lawful order. Encrypting messaging has taken off in recent years, making its way to Apple, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, in response from Silicon Valley to the abuse of access by the intelligence services in the wake of Edward Snowden. What he revealed in 2013, law enforcement says encryption thwarts their access to communications they claim they need to prosecute criminals. The government calls this going dark because they cannot see into encrypted communications, and it remains a key talking point by the authorities. Critics, including lawmakers and security experts, have long said there's no secure way to create a backdoor access to encrypted communications for law enforcement without potentially allowing malicious hackers to gain access to people's private communications. And in his remarks, Barr said the significance of the risk should be assessed based on the practical effect of consumer cybersecurity, as well as its relation to the net risks that offering the product poses for society. He suggested that residual risk of vulnerability resulting from incorporating a lawful access mechanism is materially greater than those already in the unmodified product. Some argued to achieve at best a slight incremental improvement in security, it is worth imposing a massive cost on society in the form of degraded safety. The risk, he said, was acceptable because we are talking about consumer and product devices such as messaging, smartphones, email, voice and data apps, not talking about protecting the nation's nuclear launch codes, meaning, using that form of hyperbole, your interests are irrelevant We need to make our jobs easier. So we're going to force the tech companies to assist us in that manner. The Attorney General said it was untenable that devices offer uncrackable encryption while allowing zero access to law enforcement. Just the absolute unmitigated gall, the arrogance that, we have to surrender our cybersecurity to make their job easier. What are your thoughts on that, Jeff?
Well, I certainly wish Greg was here because
I
I'm sure he would tell us that they already have the
Mhm.
ability to get into every one of these phones. I'm sure of that was our discussion. Wasn't that discussion where we had about that one iPhone? They wanted Apple to give them a backdoor to all their phones. It was related to some shooting. Was it the Las Vegas guy? Was that
Probably.
his
I
phone?
I don't remember,
I
but,
don't remember the specifics of that show, but I specifically remember Greg saying that they already have access. They probably already know everything that's already on that phone, and they don't need a backdoor because they already have it.
yeah, and we
And
just
we have no security
yeah,
from
and
the
it's systematic desensitization. I mentioned the other day, if you're watch TV and see now how many times it started with Progressive, a little plug-in that you can put in your car and to show them that you're not breaking any traffic laws, you're driving safely, you'll get a discount or a financial incentive. And now there is another company that says good driving, uh, reduction in fees. And then there's this one that's going all over the place. A woman screaming, "Don't mess with my discount." Here's the thing right now, at this point, we're talking about financial incentives for not driving quickly or unsafely. That sounds really well and good, doesn't it? Well, this is the point of something called systematic desensitization, where you get people slowly used to an idea and comfortable with something, and gradually you can force upon them greater exposure to what would have at one time been considered repugnant. So, what I consider repugnant is having my driver's records tracked. Tell me that this driving record might stay between you and your insurance company. Tell me that this is not going to evolve into something more nefarious, like, I don't know, them tracking you. Here's an example. When I was in New York and we rented a car, went up to Fort Ticonderoga, drove through the hills. The car they gave me was some little hybrid piece of crap that, when you turn, I turned it on and I thought, oh my God, it doesn't work. Well, it was electric, so there was no sound. But to go up these hills, you had to floor this thing. And there's a little meter on the dashboard and it went all the way into the red. And that's considered aggressive driving. So unless I wanted to go backwards, I had to drive what they considered aggressively. Now, how is that going to affect your driving record? How is that going to affect social credits? Will there be a time when, based on a speed limit in an area, and these devices indicated I went faster, that I'll just have a citation texted or mailed to me? We're getting comfortable with this. I'm telling people right now, you have an opportunity to use the free market to shut this down. Do not download these apps. Do not take the bait. The technology's there. Unfortunately, I think it's only a matter of time before they start making that mandatory. And this is how they're also going to implement, again, with this GPS on the cars that we're going to be comfortable with, the taxation by the mile. Have you heard about that? They're starting to do
yeah.
some
That was
experiments for that.
exactly where I was going to go with this. I was just
Yeah.
going to mention that you have what is it, Oregon or Washington that was looking at
California
doing it.
started talking about that, and all it's, their policies permeate the rest of this continental landmass like a rust. And now, sure enough, Utah, which is Californicizing itself, wants to do a voluntary participation if you drive an electric vehicle. They're starting this again. What do I say? Systematic desensitization. If you're driving an electrical vehicle, would you like to participate in this survey? Because we're losing revenues on the gas tax because vehicles are now more fuel efficient because the government mandated that they had to be. And we have electric cars. So we're not getting the revenue. Would you like to participate? And there are going to be enough idiots out there that are going to do it. If you're going to drive an electric vehicle, you're going to probably be predisposed to do whatever the government tells you to anyway. So this is coming. And the problem is, if they have that, I'm hosed. I live in a remote area. I probably drive 100 miles minimum a day wherever I go, if I go somewhere. And
Yeah, I
so,
live out in the country as well, and
yeah,
I drive at least 20,000 miles a year,
yeah.
and that's simply because of location. It takes me a while to get anywhere I go, and I chose this on purpose. I don't like being in a development where there's someone right on top of me.
Well, this
So
this ties into Agenda 21. Again, incentivizing us to move into the cities, not drive so much. And one lady said, "Yeah, they just want to get us all on buses." And I said, "You mean railroad cars?"
yeah. Well,
Let's.
and then you got, talking about this GPS stuff. You're going to let the government put a GPS in there. They're going to track your driving. And again, here we go with social credits. They're going to track everything you do. You're speeding. Okay, there's a demerit, and you reach a certain point. We're going to ban you from the roads. And they know where you're at. Oh, he's on the road. Send a cop there. There he is. Get him. They're going to ban you from road. They're going to ban you from travel. You're not going to have the ability to travel anywhere. This is a very insidious thing. They're going to crack down on the ability of movement inside this continental landmass.
Well,
And we need a wall to keep us all in.
exactly. Oh, don't get me started on the wall. So now, a friend of mine even commented on Facebook. We had this discussion that there's an area where he lives that they know the distance, and if your car travels from point A to point B under a certain amount of time, guess what? You get a citation because you had to speed to do it. You can avoid it by taking an off ramp and then going back on, but then you have to pay a toll. So again, this is about generating revenue. It's not about safety at all. And your privacy is going to sacrifice again and again and again. We had a case out here in Utah as well. And this made national, pardon my French, headlines when a nurse Wubble was standing up for a patient's privacy rights, and a police officer who's subsequently been fired put her in handcuffs, threatened to arrest her, also indicated on camera his desire to take the undesirable, meaning the homeless, patients to the Utah facility, this hospital in particular, the university, because of her lack of cooperation. So meaning he was going to foist upon them the unwashed homeless masses just to get back at them, because these are the people that can't pay. But I digress. We had a case now recently heard before the Black Robe Messiahs in Washington, D.C., up on their mountain. Mitchell versus Wisconsin. This was a case that was just decided by the Supreme Court. Again, this reveals the inherent danger of placing virtually unlimited authority in the federal judiciary and centralizing decision-making power for 50 sovereign states and over 325 million people in the hands of 9 unaccountable, unelected lawyers. Again, in the case of Mitchell versus Wisconsin, the court had to consider what police officers can do when a person suspected of driving under the influence is unconscious and can't be given a breath test. Well, the majority of the decisions, well, we're interested in public safety and we don't care about a warrant here. So here's a quick summary of the facts. In May of 2013, Gerald Mitchell's neighbor had observed him appearing intoxicated and agitated. They contacted police after he got in his van and drove away. Once he got to the shore of Lake Michigan, he had consumed some pills and also, I believe, some alcohol. They located him walking around. He had taken his van was nearby, and he was given a preliminary breath test, and he blew a 0.24, 3 times over the legal limit, and that's the blood alcohol content. He was transported to a police station, and at that point, they were going to use more reliable equipment and run another test, and the equipment there was going to be more reliable, beg your pardon, for evidentiary purposes in court. On the way, he lost consciousness and they wheeled him into the police station. He was too lethargic to participate in a breath test, so they took him to a nearby hospital. Even though he was unconscious upon arrival, they read aloud to him as he was slumped over and unresponsive a statement offering him a chance to refuse the blood test. Mitchell was unable to refuse and remained unconscious during the procedure. So at the instruction of law enforcement officials, the hospital administered the blood draw. Now, the test took place about 90 minutes after his arrest. He was charged with violating 2 related provisions of the drunk driving laws. What I'm assuming here, the provisions are in California, it was it was driving under the influence, and also they had the statutory limit of 0.8, so they could get you for both of those. He moved to suppress the results because he cited his Fourth Amendment was violated, Fourth Amendment rights, prohibition against unreasonable searchers. Again, we have incorporation. The Fourth Amendment was intended to apply to the general government, not the states. And I'm going to explain to you why this is a problem, bringing the Supreme Court in here. The Wisconsin ignored the Fourth Amendment claim. They rested on the proposition that the search was valid under the state's implied consent law, meaning every person driving on the state roads suspected of driving under the influence of drugs or alcohol is presumed to have consented to testing for the prescribed blood alcohol content level. So now, this is something I want to warn you about. We are talking about all these texting and driving laws. I told you about the textualizer in California, where police will put this a gizmo, attach it to your phone. Mind you, they're not accessing your data. They're just seeing what your swipes were during the time to see if you were driving. Expect implied consent to have them put this gizmo onto your phone when you're driving. Okay, it's coming. You heard it here first. So the Supreme Court, interestingly, ignored the implied consent issue, which was actually Wisconsin waived the blood alcohol content issue, but that's what they focused on. They focused on whether the warrantless draw, again, something waived by the state of Wisconsin, whether or not a warrantless draw on an unconscious suspect violated the Fourth Amendment, which states that the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. We get into the history of the inception of the Fourth Amendment. Dave Benner, our historian, he's been on the show with me. He's also contributor to our show Case in Point, gets into what the writs of assistance were. We're not going to have time to get too much, but just basically, unlike genuine search warrants, these required which required a much higher level of security and had to be approved by a judge. Writs of assistance did not expire, did not require itemized lists of items to be seized. And under these general writs, customs officials were given complete discretionary freedom to enter private property at will. So these two factors made the writs especially contemptible, and it roused the indignation of those who believed traditional liberty was rooted in the inviolability of property rights. Interesting bit of history as well here. James Otis, he was a famous Massachusetts agitator. He famously articulated the treachery of the policy in a legal case. He argued that the writs of assistance would guarantee arbitrary and despotic government undertakings. Every one of this writ may be a tyrant, he warned anybody that had one of these. So he ultimately lost this case, but there was a gentleman there that observed the case. A young John Adams was so moved by his persuasive words. He wrote here, "The American independence was then and there born." By all accounts, his condemnation of the writs left a lasting impression and wove itself into the tapestry of early American liberty. So this stuff is important here, folks. This was one of the reasons we went to war, okay? Massachusetts adopted a Declaration of Rights also that required searches to be reasonable and held that no warrant ought to be issued but in cases and with formalities prescribed by law. So now, once again, we have the Supreme Court deciding, well, can we just throw this out? When I was in law school, we learned about the Fourth Amendment. And you know what we also learned? There are so many exceptions to this warrant. All of these exceptions came about by the Supreme Court essentially gutting the warrant. You're going to have a harder time finding where it's going to be upheld as opposed to when there's going to be an exception to it. In fact, there were so many exceptions to it, we had to come up with an acronym so we could remember them all. The first thing you do when you sit down to the bar exam is you write all the first letters because you're going to come up with these. That's how many there are. So let's get to the present case here really quick. The court's presented with a criminal matter arising out of the state of Wisconsin. The appellate court sent the case to the state Supreme Court to determine if the Fourth Amendment of the United States was violated. Does the state of Wisconsin not have their own constitution? Why would they go straight to the Fourth Amendment? As I said in my article, this is a clear example of a state surrendering its sovereignty. When you call this a constitutional question, ultimately this matter is going to go to the federal judiciary. Gone is the desire of the people of Wisconsin to come up with their own standard. Again, I've said this time and time again at the Philadelphia Convention, this sort of federal negative veto, albeit Madison proffered one from the legislature over state laws, we're getting the same effect when we get this from the judiciary. I submit to you, if you're interested in this topic, read Government by Judiciary by Raoul Berger, or you can go to my website, SuzanneCSherman.com. Under suggested reading, I have Dave Benner's article on the book. It's a little booklet on the 14th Amendment and the incorporation doctrine. This is the stuff we talk about here on the Cerberus Radio Network. So again, the state of Wisconsin surrenders their sovereignty, calls this a constitutional question. Now we're going to talk about the Fourth Amendment and how it applies to laws enacted in the state of Wisconsin. So here we see the United States Supreme Court sitting in judgment of how local police are handling state laws with regards to driving under the influence on state roads, which according to the Constitution as ratified is a matter to be determined by the states, regardless of this erroneous Fourth Amendment claim. So the Constitution should control, but which one? I submit to you the Constitution of the state of Wisconsin. So once again, we can thank the 14th Amendment for opening the door to federal interference in matters it was never intended to nor consented to by the states. We've talked about the preamble to the Bill of Rights, which again was intended to instill public confidence that this new government would not overreach into their sovereign business. What is their business? Anything not included in Article 1, Section 8, nor prohibited by the states, nor prohibited to the states. That's the 10th Amendment. Thomas Jefferson felt that the 10th Amendment was inherently necessary to preserve state sovereignty and keep the general government in check. Again, as late as 1833, in a case called Barron versus Baltimore, even nationalist John Marshall had to admit that the first 10 amendments, he said, contain no expression indicating an intention to apply them to state governments. This court cannot so apply them. So, in delivering the opinion of the court in the Mitchell case, and if you go to my article, if you're interested in really getting into this, you can click a link right there and you can actually read the opinion. Justice Alito refers to two previous instances where he says, we have addressed the circumstances under which a police officer may administer a warrantless blood alcohol concentration test to a motorist who appears to have been driving under the influence of alcohol. Again, dictating local police procedures was not a delegated power to the general government. Jeff, if during my yapping here, you can find that Article 1, Section 8. I will apologize and make the biggest crow pie anybody's ever seen, and I will eat it on Facebook Live. So the Constitution, as amended, and the process for doing so is set forth in Article 5. Congress or the states can propose this amendment, and 3/4 have to ratify it. Alito here is acknowledging that the Supreme Court can hold its own convention, and guess what? States, you're not invited. So again, this interpretation is unhistorical and it's also problematic. So the 39th Congress, again, when they proposed the 14th Amendment, did not debate this issue of incorporation. No such premise had been adhered to in the previous years. So again, 1925, we had a case called Gitlow versus New York, and that's where we first started seeing incorporation. Another nefarious case involving incorporation, you can read about it on my website. Again, this is the stuff we talk about here on the Cerberus Radio Network, was McDonald versus the city of Chicago, and that is where the Second Amendment was now held to apply to the states. That was cheered as a victory. It was not. So here's what Alito said. The importance of the needs served by the test is hard to overestimate. The bottom line is that these BAC tests are needed for enforcing laws that save lives. Highway safety is critical. It is served by laws criminalizing driving with a certain BAC levels. The tests are crucial links in a chain on which vital interests hang. He explains that twice we have referred to the effects of irresponsible driving as slaughter comparable to the ravages of war. So here he is comparing statistics of highway deaths attributable to drunk driving to the ravages of war. And as I said in my article, this is hyperbole at best and disingenuous at worst. You know, it's language that's selected to trigger the emotions, and it's going to cause people to turn a blind eye that should be jealously guarding against an overexpanding encroachment on state sovereignty. So why should we be concerned about this going to the Supreme Court? I'll tell you why. Because what's going to happen is we're going to eventually, and I think many of us have already had, give up on the fact that the states are the ones that should determine how the police are going to behave in this manner. So Supreme Court decisions have really gutted the warrant requirement. As I mentioned earlier, we learned that in law school. Further, the court here was mixed on whether a warrant under the Mitchell circumstances was required at all. And this is where it gets really scary. Here's our the Supreme Court's darling conservative, Justice Thomas. Here's what he said. The better and far simpler way to resolve this case is to apply the per se rule I proposed in Missouri versus McNeely. That was another case they discussed extensively in the opinion. Under that rule, the natural metabolization of alcohol in the bloodstream creates an exigency once police have probable cause to believe the driver is drunk. And here's where it gets really dicey. Regardless of whether the driver was conscious. So here's what he's saying is if you're on a public road and you're suspected of drunk driving, the police have the right to put a metallic object in your arm and draw blood from you to aid in your prosecution. Once again, our rights must always yield to the convenience of law enforcement under the auspices of public safety. Justice, go ahead.
Honestly, what would have been a problem? There's no police force here on this continental America that can't get a warrant within a few minutes. What would have been the problem with them getting a actual warrant? They had probable cause for it because all they can point back to the breathalyzer at the scene, his erratic driving. They could have made a case to a judge, got a warrant, and done it legally. But what was the point of all this? That you do not own your body, and the government just told you don't own your body. We own you, and we'll take whatever we want from you.
You want to hear something crazy? If you read the opinion, one of the reasons they said that it's inconvenient to get a warrant is the magistrate on call. It might be late at night. Ladies and gentlemen, if a judge is asleep, you're screwed. If the judge is sleeping, it's inconvenient to get a warrant. Here's something. How about we hold judges on call to the same accountability we hold the rest of the unwashed masses? If you're on call, answer your damn phone. If you're a judge, you get to sleep. So Sotomayor, Ginsburg, Kagan joined in the dissent. And this is what happens when you don't like a judge because you don't like the president that appointed them. These are the three that stood up for us. And they said, when the aim of a search is to uncover evidence of a crime, the Fourth Amendment generally requires police to obtain a warrant, and that the warrant requirement is not a mere formality. It ensures that necessary judgment calls are made by neutral and detached magistrates, not by the officer engaged in the competitive enterprise of ferreting out a crime. If you want to live in a state that honors your rights, your privacy, you should have the right to do so. You should have the opportunity to do so. Under Thomas's standard, you don't get that. If you go to the Supreme Court, their ruling, their opinion will apply to everybody on this continental landmass. Ladies and gentlemen, we did not go to war to live under this system. By surrendering these matters to the federal judiciary, we are admitting we're incapable of governing our right to consent to our system of government. And we wonder why we really fought this war at all. I'm Suzanne Sherman. This is the Cerberus Radio Network. Thanks for listening. We are out of time.